this debate, I believe this is Democracy Now. Yes, Democracy Now. This is a interesting debate. Let me know when you want to stop it. I'm just going to say that.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, we begin today's show looking at the war in Ukraine. Russia's announced it's rejoining a deal allowing for grain shipments from Ukraine's.
And let me say this real quick, CJ. Pause real quick.
After Russia withdrew from the deal, sparking fears it could worsen.
Democracy Now! Has been so hit or miss on this issue. I've been watching. Amy has done a great job at not expressing her own opinion on this. And this is why I say Democracy Now! Has been good. Because they had great debate. They had Noam Chomsky on. They had Glenn Greenwald on. So they bring great people on to debunk the Ukraine narrative. But then I get disappointed because then every once in a while, they will have a segment where it just straight up repeat Ukrainian propaganda. It's like, bro, you just had Noam Chomsky on. You just had Glenn Greenwald on. How are you not retaining any of the information that they are telling you? They would do a segment with they had Jeffrey Sachs on, and Jeffrey Sachs debunked the entire Ukraine narrative. Then they did a segment the other day, completely super anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine again. So this is why I'm confused. They would do good segments every once in a while, but they wouldn't retain any of the information, and that's super confusing to me. And Amy, I really don't even know where she stands on this. Like, cause she always play like the neutral commentator. But anyway, let's play the video.
Absolutely. Let's go here.
And the global hunger crisis. The Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, said the renewed deal would prioritize grain shipments to Somalia, Djibouti, Sudan, and other African nations. Russia said it rejoined the deal after Ukraine agreed not to use the sea corridor to attack Russian forces. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting senior Russian military leaders have had high-level discussions about how tactical weapons could be used in the war in Ukraine. That's tactical nuclear weapons. The article was based on unnamed U.S. officials who said they have seen no.
You see, and this is something that she would do too. She would like just repeat whatever the mainstream media says, and she would never like challenge it. She said, according to Ukrainian officials, Putin said this, and then she would do this all the time. Anyway, keep the video going.
Evidence that the Russians were moving nuclear weapons into place or making preparations for a nuclear strike. Last month, President Biden described the war in Ukraine as the first time the world has seen a direct threat of the use of a nuclear weapon since the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years ago. In a speech to Democratic donors, Biden said, quote, "We're trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp." Well, today we host a debate on the U.S. response to Russia's invasion and U.S. policy toward Russia. We're joined by two guests. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Matt Duss. He's former foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, a Ukrainian-American who's a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And in Raleigh, North Carolina, we're joined by Ray McGovern, former senior CIA analyst. His 27-year career as a CIA analyst.
Pause real quick. See, I didn't know that much about Ray. See, pause. Real quick. When I first saw this video and I saw the introduction, I was like, wait, who's going to take what position here? Because I don't know. I didn't know a ton about Matt Duss. I didn't know a ton about Ray McGovern. I just heard Bernie, foreign policy advisor versus CIA officer,
right? And
the person who advocated for peace would surprise you. You would think, right? But anyway, let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, can I just jump in one more time? Yeah, that there's no conflict of interest, right? Well, you have a Ukrainian American on the one side, and on the other side, you have basically someone who I think identifies as a leftist now. He's part of like this leftist veteran movement. So it's interesting that on the surface, you assume, just like you said, Nick, that one would come out to be aggressively anti-war and the other one would make an argument for why war is necessary. And when you watch the video, you get surprised and say, like, what the hell is happening?
branch and daily briefer of the president's daily brief. At the time, it was George H.W. Bush. He's co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Welcome you both to Democracy Now! Ray McGovern, let's begin with you. Why don't you lay out what you think the U.S. policy should be toward Russia now and in dealing with the Ukraine war?
Yeah, Ray is pretty colorful. You can tell he's like a he's pretty colorful. I'll just leave it there. Pretty funny to me.
He strikes me as an old professor who's retired and doesn't give a shit anymore.
Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. I gotta say it. Right here.
Includes serving as chief of Soviet Foreign Policy Branch and daily briefer of the president's daily brief. At the time, it was George H.W. Bush. He's co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Welcome you both to Democracy Now! Ray McGovern, let's begin with you. Why don't you lay out what you think the U.S. policy should be toward Russia now and in dealing with the Ukraine war?
Amy, I think we need to go back and figure out how this all started in order to figure out how to end it. In a word, you quoted the new New York Times story this morning about Russian tactical nuclear missiles and senior Russian military officials discussing this. The source described by the New York Times was multiple U.S. officials. Now, I dare say that the same multiple.
And hey, just real quick, I'll keep it quick. I want the video keep going. Ray low key just called out Democracy Now! Because Democracy Now! Does this all the time. Where they'll just report on this, it's like, according to officials, Russians are committing massive war crimes in this area, and then they quoting Ukrainian government officials, and that's okay if you want to report on rumors of war crimes, but your report should at least add the caveat that Ukrainian government officials have often lied, that it comes from them, and we should be skeptical. Maybe we should no, like Amy, she often would report the stuff that comes from the State Department as pure fact. Anyway, let's keep it going.
No, but also just a quick point along those lines is the fact that he has discredited the New York Times as a news source on foreign policy because they're one of the ones that led us into an illegal and immoral invasion of Iraq after 9/11 and worse. After 9/11 specifically, Afghanistan and Iraq. So he's saying like, look, the New York Times has no validity here as a news source because they are a propaganda machine for the state, and we've seen this before. So look at what Ray's doing. History. Let's go back and see how we got here. Let's analyze the problem in terms of the long narrative, not the one fucking clip you guys want to keep focusing on, which is Putin is bad because of the recent events, period.
Absolutely.
Amy, I think we need to go back and figure out how this all started in order to figure out how to end it. In a word, you quoted the new New York Times story this morning about Russian tactical nuclear missiles and senior Russian military officials discussing this. The source described by the New York Times was multiple U.S. officials. Now, I dare say that the same multiple U.S. officials and some of the same authors of this piece that warned us 7 times at the end of July in one article that there were sure to be weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I guess we have to say that the New York Times has lost its credibility on these issues, the more so since they back off the story themselves.
You would think the Bernie guy would be saying this. Once again, super quick, you would think the Bernie guy will be the person saying this, right? You would think AOC, Ilhan, Bernie will be on corporate media after they get backlash for taking our position, making this argument. But go ahead, let's keep playing. Let's keep playing.
There's no need for us to use tactical nuclear missiles, and we never threatened to do so. And Putin happens to be right on that. Last thing I'll say here is that the notion that the Russians are desperate is erroneous. It's contrived. The Russians aren't losing. The Russians are not going to lose because they can't afford to.
The same thing. They're not losing. This story, this framing that we're hearing lately, like they may have wins here and there, but come on, this is not even a fight. This is not one. But
and the Washington, they're
constantly. I mean that Putin.
Just the fact that they're drafting civilians and they're desperate. That's the narrative we keep hearing in this country. They're drafting Ukrainians, and and you hear people like this. Why would he have a reason to lie? He served this government for decades. He was trained as an analyst of intelligence to see what the hell is happening, what happened before that, and how can we predict the future. And his point is like, look, this narrative that Russia is losing the war, they're not even trying yet. Like full-fledged trying to beat the fuck out of Ukraine. They haven't tried. They're trying to, and he'll explain better than I will, they're trying to retain their own autonomy in light of what they see as an emerging existential geopolitical threat.
Absolutely. All right, back to the video.
Putin sees an existential threat from not only Ukraine becoming part of NATO, but NATO using the emplacements for so-called anti-ballistic missiles in Romania and Poland already there to put in cruise missiles or to put in hypersonic missiles, which Putin himself warned last December would give him between 7 and 10 minutes, or if hypersonic missiles, 5 minutes to decide, in a word, whether to blow up the rest of the world. Now, Katrina Vanden Heuvel said, in an op-ed just last week, we have to empathize with anyone, even the hated Putin, even the hated Russians. And, just thinking this through, and I'll close with this, thinking about how many Americans hate Russia. I mean, hate is the word. And I think back to South Pacific. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be fought from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught the Russians to hate in order to remain part of the fourth estate. You've got to, I made up the last two lines, okay? But that's what it is. In a word, we've had 6 years of unfounded hating Russians. I mentioned Russiagate. I think the press, the fourth estate, could do a real service by saying, hey, we were wrong about that. The Russians didn't hack into the DNC, and they didn't do all those other dastardly things that they were accused of. And let those 35 Russian diplomats come on back in. Let's talk to each other. Let's work this out. There's no reason why we can't make a deal.
All right. So at this point, I remember when I was watching it. I'm at this point in the video. I remember I was watching this. I'm like, man, this is such a beautiful video. It's been sitting, I'm like, man, this is a great video. This is why I said, I'm like, man, Democracy Now! May be on and all, but at least they killed it with this one, man. Like, I'm sure Matt does. He a Bernie Sanders guy. Sure, he's gonna come with something that won't completely ruin this moment, right? Right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Can I just say something about the singing? Because I feel that a lot of people that may not be familiar with what he's singing and why, he would just, oh, here's this old cute man bursting out into song, which in many ways will invalidate his credibility as an analyst and speaker. So I want to just highlight the why he would choose to repeat the lyrics to that song, because I experienced that when I was going through boot camp in the Marines. You are forced to sing those fucking songs and chants in the middle of physical exertion, because when you're in the middle of physical exertion and you're forced to repeat something over and over again, that physical exertion makes your mind vulnerable to the propaganda that you're repeating literally and forced to repeat, because they want to lead, like you watch a film, louder. I want you to scream that louder. I can't hear you. And so you have to be singing these type of songs as you're marching, as you're digging trenches, as you're doing some kind of work. And what ends up happening is that unconsciously you begin to adapt this mindset and this political position that yes, Russia is the ultimate enemy that needs to be destroyed, or Japan is the ultimate enemy, whoever the enemy of the day is. These type of songs are actually a very strong propaganda weapon to brainwashing individuals who are already in the military, already forced to serve, but to make their minds much more aggressive, if you will, towards the enemy in a kind of George Orwell 1984, where you have the moment of rage, the minute of hate, or what have you. That actually does happen in the military. So I just want to say that the singing has a purpose, as cute as it sounds coming from Ray.
No, that's such a good point, because that's why Ray started singing there, because he was talking about how we were trained to hate the Russians. And he started singing those songs that meant to brainwash the soldiers. And that's exactly, excuse me, that's exactly what Russiagate was designed to do, was to get people to hate Russia to the point where they excuse giving billions of dollars to Nazis. But anyway, let's continue the video, because this was otherwise an amazing video. Great 6 minutes. Now it goes. I was vibing with this video.
Yeah, Nick sent it to me. I was watching it. I was like, "Oh, this is." I was like, "Okay, cool." And he didn't warn me. He didn't warn me about the next several minutes that we're about to
I
listen
told you I
to.
wasn't planning on covering this. This was background noise, so I was like, "Man, this boy Ray killing it, basic stuff." Then this Bernie Sanders guy come in and ruins everything. So let's play the video. Let's hear from the counter argument. Go ahead.
Matt Doss on this issue. Matt, as a foreign policy advisor to Bernie Sanders, famously an advocate for peace, not war. What is your perspective on how this war can end, and also the issue of how it began?
Right. I mean, well, thank you for having me, first of all. I would say the easiest way for this war to end would be for Vladimir Putin to end his invasion.
Oh, Jesus fucking Russian Christ. This is how I knew it was going to go all downhill. Because and I love the interview, because I didn't know this at first. I love how he throws shade, whether he knows it or not. He was like, "Well, you're a representative for the Bernie Sanders, who used to know to be this war." That was a shade. Play that part again. Go back and replay it. We let it play longer.
Absolutely.
We throw that question as a shade. Like, I remember when you guys used to pretend to be anti-war. Now, what the fuck is this about? You want to explain? That's the nice version of what he said. Let's play it again.
Foreign policy advisor to Bernie Sanders, famously an advocate for peace, not war. What is your perspective on how this war can end, and also the issue of how it began?
Right. I mean, well, thank you for having me, first of all. I would say the easiest way for this war to end would be for Vladimir Putin to end his invasion and withdraw Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. As far as how this war began, I mean, there's certainly a lot of things we could bring in to describe, the deteriorating U.S.-Russia relationship over the past decades and longer. But just to focus on this issue of NATO, which was brought up just earlier, certainly Vladimir Putin has brought up the concern about NATO. This is not something just he has brought up. Other Russian officials have brought it up in the past. I think it's fair
and other U.S. officials as well. You guys always leave that part out. They always say Russia keep bringing up the conspiracy theory that we span NATO, that it will escalate to a war. Joe Biden in the 90s, he gave a speech in 1997 where he explained that the one thing that would probe Russia into war is expansion of NATO. You have Barack Obama. You have plenty of U.S. State Department officials that straight up said that escalating towards war with Russia, we can do that if we expand NATO. So they keep pretending that this is only a Putin talking point when everyone knew that. Everyone knew it. But anyway, let's continue.
I do want to ask either one of you if you know the name of the organization he's with. What is it?
To describe,
let me see if I can. Is it Carnegie something?
I think it's a Carnegie Mellon Institute for Peace or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, do you know any background about that organization? And I'm curious to know his background. Like, does he have any background with the CIA? Does he have any background with any sort of intelligence? Because he absolutely is not a progressive. So I'm curious to understand why is he
Why was Bernie Sanders
advising Bernie Sanders? You get what I'm saying? Like, how did he get in that space, considering the point of view that he has? So that's the reason why I'm curious about the organization and his history here.
Remember what I said, CJ, when I said we thought the Bernie Sanders coalition was further left than what it was. We thought that like we had this giant coalition and we all was on the same page. And then after Bernie dropped out, we started going issue by issue, and we realized, like, oh shit, there was a coalition with a lot of liberals in it, with a lot of people who just wanted healthcare. They're like, oh, I want a $15 minimum wage, so I support Bernie. But they're fucking Zionists and neocons. They really believe in Western chauvinism. Matt Duss is literally like the face of that wing of the Bernie campaign. And go ahead, let's play the video. And you guys see what this is crazy shit that came from Bernie. His foreign policy advisor. It's not like this is his healthcare advisor who had this bad foreign policy take. This is what you do, bro. He is horrible at his main purpose. But anyway, let's keep it playing.
I mean, is he? And the thing is, I wonder, is that why Bernie's bad now? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, Bernie's bad now.
Like, maybe Bernie has always been bad, and he hired him because he knew Matt Duss would be bad. It's bad too. There are a lot of questions that you got to ask. Guy, you get a lot of questions. Did he hire him because he's bad, or did he hire him? He made a staffing mistake, and then he was influenced. I don't know, man. I think he knew what he was doing because there are plenty of anti-war people. Why not hire Chris Hedges for that position? Why find Matt Duss over Adamu Baraka?
Somebody who is fine with that the establishment is fine with. That the establishment is fine with.
And
he has to get somebody that's gonna advise him like the establishment wants to be advising. Go ahead.
Exactly, CJ. No, that's it, CJ. You're absolutely right. This is Bernie's way of. Bernie will always frame himself as anti-establishment, but he'll have people around him that can advise him in terms of what the establishment. And if he's getting too far left, then they'll bring him back. Like, hey, you can't say that about Israel, or you can't say about you can't say that about Russia invading Ukraine, because at the end of the day, we have NATO interests in there, Bernie. So you can't come out and be anti-war on this one. You have to come out and be anti-discussions and anti-civil discourse around trying to establish some kind of peace talks. You can't be for peace talks. You have to be exactly what he just said. Well, when Putin decides to stop his aggression, then we can talk. It's like, when has the United States ever been called out on those terms? Well, when the U.S. stops its aggression, then maybe we can negotiate or have a discussion.
So Pramila Jayapal, one last thing we get back to the video. Pramila Jayapal, I covered this many times, well documented. She was one of the people that was an insider of Bernie Sanders surrogate and advisor. She played a key part of getting Bernie Sanders to drop out and endorse Joe Biden. She also played a key role in fighting off the faction of the Bernie campaign that wanted to go after Democrats more, and she won. So once again, why does Bernie hire her in that position?
Right.
Is it just an accident, or does he put her there for a reason? Bernie hired Pramila to control the left. That's the conclusion I draw at this point. I'm sorry, I can't. What other conclusion can I make? Because it get worse. Let's play it, because this guy is horrible. let's play this, and you got to see how bad it gets.
Brought up, other Russian officials have brought it up in the past. I think it's fair to say that some of the steps that were taken with regard to NATO could have been done differently. But this idea that Vladimir Putin had to wage this war because he sees an existential threat from NATO, I think has just been completely discredited by events. Let's remember, Finland and Sweden.
What now? This statement that has been completely discredited by events. Like, this is an existential threat. I don't understand how a person. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. This is one of the things that makes me suspicious about a person who's advising Bernie, and why I'm asking, like who is this person? Because it doesn't make sense. Let me let you hear what he says here again.
Sees an existential threat from NATO, I think has just been completely discredited by.
Like, encirclement is not an existential threat. Adding to NATO is not an existential threat. Putting weapons in Ukraine is not an existential threat. Like, it's not even believable to say that. You get what I'm saying? So that's why I'm saying, like,
do anyone really believe
any sane person who can read a book or a document would know that's not true. So he's intentionally saying it. That's why I'm saying, Who is this guy? Go ahead.
Just to illustrate how ridiculous his point is, you guys see the mainstream media article about, oh my God, the DPRK is doing military exercises. You mean they were using their military? They functioning as a state? Nigga, that's your story? So North Korea could be in their own territory. They would do a military drill, and they're like, oh my God, the DPRK is escalating tension because they're showing off the military prowess. China would do a military drill in their own area. And they say, China provoking the West with the military involvement. Meanwhile, NATO can arm a country next to Russia. And they like, oh, why are you complaining? Imagine if China or the DPRK did military drills and had intelligence officers in Mexico, in Texas, that was arming and radicalizing anti-American extremists. That's the equivalent position. And Matt Duss and the NATO left really believe the United States will look at that situation and be like, yeah, I mean, Mexico is a sovereign country. They have the right to accept help of Russian arms and China arms. They got the right to be anti-American. They have the right to reject our ideology. Nigga, we embargo Cuba for decades just for rejecting capitalism. What the fuck do you guys think we would do?
Nick's hard to interrupt. I keep like unmuting myself and muting myself.
No,
it's all good. It's all good. No, I was just gonna say, and nobody even throws on the table the idea is like, you see this in news stories, it's like, yeah, we acknowledge this is true, and then mainstream press stops talking about it. We have American military boots on the ground already. We're on that front now. We're not even fighting a proxy war. We're starting to put military personnel on that front. And so, again, going back to Matt's point that I don't understand how anybody can view this as an existential threat. Well, if Russia had boots on the ground in Cuba right now for a military training exercise, I bet the United States would have something to say about that proximity to the U.S. versus what they're saying or not saying right now regarding U.S. boots on the ground and their proximity to Russia. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, let's continue. I just want to let you guys know, getting through his part is going to be very hard. Also, and I'm going to let it play a little bit this time. Let's play a little bit because he lies just like a politician in corporate media. Every sentence, everything he says is a half lie, like he was coached. Like this motherfucker was coached by NAFO. But let's let it play.
Yeah, so what we'll do, Nick, let's play it, and then we know we're going to rewind it and stop it at the parts. But let's play it full through for maybe a minute or two, and then we'll come back. Just know.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I'm going to have to be writing some shit down as he's talking because this is tough. So what is it at? So I'll let it play at least a minute here.
By events. Let's remember, Finland and Sweden announced their decision to join NATO some months ago. Finland shares an 800-mile border with Russia. The response from the Russian government was basically, no big deal. I would suggest that if NATO was really contributing to the sense of existential threat here, we might have seen a bit of a different response to Finland joining NATO.
And I'd like to ask you, Matt, in terms of that, though, clearly there's a far different relationship between Ukraine and Russia than there is between Finland and Russia. Clearly, Russia historically sees Ukraine as the entry point to previous invasions and attack on its country.
I love how this dude is low-key rebuking them.
In the 19th century.
Because he thought he was going to talk more. He thought he had more to say. He was caught off guard because this guy heard the other guy talk and sing on the other side. And then all he did was come in and point out a couple of things specifically. Now think about what he chose to point out and kept quiet. Specifically the point about NATO. Then he's all, okay, I'm going to be quiet. That's why he was kind of off guard. Okay, well, now I got to bring up, you're forcing people to have to point out that you're left and you're stopping here. This is where you're stopping. Go ahead, Nick.
And knows what he had to do. And we always had to do this with the NATO left. After his answer, the interviewer responds with some more details. He said, for one, Russia would be concerned because they've been invaded through Ukraine multiple times. Why are you leaving? And he says that because it's almost like he's like, why are you leaving that out, bro? Go back and rewind that part because he has to fill in more details because the people who support the U.S.-Ukraine narrative, they only get away with it because they always leave out giant parts of the story. For example, this conflict only started this year when Russia invaded. They ignored the Maidan coup, they ignored the Minsk Accords, and they ignored this basic fact that Russia has historically been invaded by Napoleon and Nazis before. I explained this many times. Go ahead, Carlos. We get back.
No, that's huge because he basically pivots, right? The question is very, very specific, and he says like, oh, well, I think Russia has already shown their true colors. They're their own best argument against their own invasion based on what they've done. And if it wasn't a bad thing, Sweden and Finland would not have decided to join NATO. And so the fact that they joined NATO means that this is a good thing, being anti-Russian. When the Russian position regarding Finland is like, we'll worry about that if we have to in the near future, but they have not been a threat. We're not worried about Finland. We're worried about this specific geopolitical region because, as Nick just said, and as the host here, I forget his name, he outlines like, okay, I'm gonna throw this. It's not gonna be a softball, but it's not gonna be my fastest fastball. But here comes a pitch, and the pitch is like, look, you can't compare Finland to Ukraine because historically one is strategic and the other one is just a geographical accident.
Yeah, go back like 30 seconds, CJ, and play his response again because he's not even the one debating him, and he just slaps his argument and debunks it just like that. And let's play it again. Let's speak for itself.
To join NATO some months ago, Finland shares an 800-mile border with Russia. The response from the Russian government was basically, no big deal. I would suggest that if NATO was really contributing to the sense of existential threat here, we might have seen a bit of a different response to Finland joining NATO.
And I'd like to ask you, Matt, in terms of that, though, clearly there is a far different relationship between Ukraine and Russia than there is between Finland and Russia. Clearly, Russia historically sees Ukraine as the entry point to previous invasions and attack on its country, whether it's Napoleon in the 19th century or Hitler and the Nazis in the 20th century. Your sense of Putin's view of the special relationship that has existed between Ukraine and Russia?
No, I think that's very fair to bring up. Clearly, there's a very different historical relationship between Russia and Ukraine. And Putin himself has described his view of that relationship, which is that Ukrainians don't really exist. They are simply Russians. Certainly, Ukrainians disagree with that. And I think most of the people in the world would disagree with that. Ukraine is a different country. Ukraine has a different culture, a different history. Certainly, there is a historical relationship with Russia. But I think this also gets to what one of Putin's real goals here is, and that is not just to defend himself against the alleged threat from NATO encroachment, but it is to erase the Ukrainians as an independent political entity. And I think we see various steps that he is taking to make that vision real, including the kidnapping, essentially, of thousands of Ukrainian children.
You mean the thing we just debunked? We already debunked that.
And
he repeats state talking points. You see that? We just debunked that already. But go ahead, Carlos.
It just pisses me off, Nick and CJ, to hear people like this who pretend to be leftists, pretend to be progressives, pretend to be on the moral high ground, and all this bullshit. When the argument that he just outlined, right, Ukrainians and most of the world would not agree with Putin's perspective or viewpoint that Ukraine doesn't exist and Ukrainians are basically Russians. As a Ukrainian American, that's very personal for Matt. But where the fuck is that argument when it comes to Palestine? Where the fuck is that argument when it comes to most of the world already agrees that Palestine deserves to be recognized as autonomous from Israel? Most of the fucking world just voted against the embargoes on Cuba, and the United States doesn't seem to give a shit about that kind of stuff. Where are those moral arguments? When is Matt going to say that the United States' own track record argues against the United States making a claim that this particular invasion is a bad one as opposed to historical ones that they participated in? It's that double standard that drives people crazy and creates that disenchantment with our current government and any representative from either aisle that wants to have this moral high ground, because no one's present the track record right now. And I don't trust GOP anti-war. That they're just doing that shit right now to look good, because the Democrats are the pro-war party at the moment. When they get in power, they do the same shit. I mean, they're the ones that started Iraq and Afghanistan in the first place. But the whole point is that it's a duopoly, and hopefully this kind of contradiction highlights that for people who still don't understand that both parties answer to the same established system.